Public.
Interest. Public.
Interest.
Interest. Public interest.
Interest. Public.
Public interest.
Public interest. Public interest.
In the 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 public interest.
With Jim Sirianni.
Hi, and welcome to another edition of In the Public Interest. I'm Jim Sirianni, your host. We have a great show for you this week. On this week's show, we're going to do things a little differently than we usually do. This week, we are going to touch on the tragedy that took place in Isla Vista. However, today's discussion will focus on how we as a community can heal from the horrific event that took place merely 2 weeks ago already, from this weekend. I know a lot has been said and covered about the shooter, about the victims, their families and friends, about how this has affected students at UCSB, City College, and friends and neighbors around the Isla Vista community. And I know they're probably tired of all the media attention that has come to them. We certainly don't want to take away from their loss or anything from them, and our hearts, of course, continue to go out to those who were directly affected by the shooting, the families and the friends as well. But on today's show, we wanted to explore how a tragic, horrific event like this affects the community as a whole in the long term. How does the event affect maybe our first responders, the fire department, police, sheriff's deputies, etc.? In fact, we'll discuss that on another show next week as well. So how do we as a community, as residents of Isla Vista, Goleta, Santa Barbara, Carpinteria, or even the entire county, cope with the aftermath of this unbelievable, tragic event? Well, on today's show, we're going to answer some questions about how we move on as a community. With me in the studio today, I have Dr. Gil Reyes. He is the Executive Director of Santa Barbara Response Network, and he is also the President-elect of the Santa Barbara County Psychological Association, and also Gina Carvalho. Did I say that correctly?
That's correct.
Gina is also with the Santa Barbara Response Network. She is the Public Information Officer, or PIO as we call it, and she also is the Communication Director for the Glendon Association. And they are here to help us sort through all of this stuff that goes on in our minds or what have you. And welcome both of you, Gil and Gina, to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having us, Jim.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim.
I'm glad that you're able to be here, and I know you both have very busy days, and so it's wonderful. So the first question I wanted to ask is, when a community experiences an event like the shootings a couple of weeks ago, how does it affect the community as a whole?
Well, the words that occur to people are shock, horror, disbelief. These are common reactions, of course, but they're more than words. They have to do with the human experience of violence and human expectations. So we don't expect this kind of thing to be going on, and when it does, it's horrifying, it's shocking. We have to try to take it in, make sense of it, and deal with a great deal of emotion. Mm-hmm. Some of that emotion is fear, some of that emotion is anger. Some of that emotion leans more towards sadness or sorrow, a sense of loss. It also is very motivating. It, on the one hand, causes us to feel united because we have very shared feelings.
Sure.
There aren't very many people who aren't going to be feeling those things. So it pulls us together, and it also moves us, typically in one or two directions. And those directions go toward, let's not let this happen again. And let's learn everything we can from this event, how to have a better world than the one we have right at this moment.
Right.
And I think living in Santa Barbara, we live in an idyllic paradise. And I think something like this shatters us. Not here, not Santa Barbara. This couldn't happen to us. And I think most communities where something like this happens, it shatters that.
Sure.
We feel safe. We feel protected. So just how well Gil explained the reactions, I feel that shock, but also disbelief, and almost like a sense of invasion.
Mm-hmm.
I felt safe here.
Sure. And we think of Santa Barbara as the paradise, and in fact, I find it ironic that the shootings happened, and then not maybe a week later, we have the television show The Bachelorette is doing an episode in beautiful Santa Barbara, and reality shows shoot their programs up here because it's such a beautiful place, and yet we have tragedies like this, and then or the fires that in years past, and so it is kind of a difficult thing to deal with.
Exactly.
And you were going to say, Gina?
Yeah, I was just saying, almost like when you were describing the things that happen in Santa Barbara in our beautiful paradise, it's almost like we've been let down.
Sure.
I thought this place was okay. So there are a lot of shock to this. I mean, there's these little ripple effects of shock that we're experiencing, all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And
then what are some of the long-term effects of an event like this later down the road in a year or two?
They vary depending on who they happen to, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
As a community, we will certainly remember this for a long time. But the people who will remember it the most are those people who have suffered the most.
Sure,
it'll have a durable impact on them. A loss, losing your child, losing your partner in an adult relationship, that kind of thing. That's going to leave a marked feeling there for a long time, and it's going to come up on birthdays, anniversaries, other life
Holidays.
transitions. Yeah, really serious, times of joy, times of people coming together. We sometimes have a moment of the absence or the missing of another person.
Sure.
Santa Barbara more broadly, and the state of California, the United States, I mean, this has been felt all over the U.S., we tend to move on, to be quite honest, and I don't mean that in any kind of callous way. It's just a reality that something else comes along, and we only have so much attention for so much time. So there is a phasic quality to these types of events that I wouldn't want to not say. And that is that we all feel a shared interest. There's a period when we feel very engaged with each other, and we use words like heroic, certainly the deeds of those officers in the community. A young man who came to the aid of one of the women who was wounded. These are acts of heroism, and that's phase one in the shortest phase. It typically only lasts a few hours. And then there's the honeymoon phase, and that's a period of time when we all pull together and we see what's good about each other, and we want to be part of the social change, the making something good out of this. But
Right.
I want to talk also to you briefly, Jim, about what's called the disillusionment phase, because this is going to go to questions you might have later about how do we heal. And one of the things that kicks in after not too long a period of time, and it varies, in Hurricane Katrina, the honeymoon period was really short. For others, it has lasted for months. So what I can tell you is that after the honeymoon comes the disillusionment, when we start to see the fragmentation and the divisions, and it's not as pretty a picture. And fortunately, it doesn't last forever, because eventually people do even move on from that, try to make the most of what they've learned, and plan for a better tomorrow.
In case you're just joining us, you're listening to In the Public Interest, and we're having a discussion today about the events that took place a couple of weeks ago in Isla Vista, the shootings, and how to heal from them as a community. And my guests this week are Dr. Gil Reyes and also Gina Carvalho. I'm sorry, Gina.
No, you're doing.
Am I
very
doing it
well.
okay? Okay,
You're
Carvalho.
doing just fine.
Thank you. And they are my guests this week to help us kind of weed through, if you will, all the feelings that we might be having as a community. Another question that I have for you is it possible for someone to not even be aware that this event that's now, it's 2 weeks old, and eventually it's going to be a month, and then 6 months, a year, what have you, but is it possible for an event like this to affect somebody and for them to not even be aware of it? For example, if they are depressed but they can't figure out why they're depressed or something like that, is that possible?
It's very possible. And also another thing that I was thinking when Dr. Reyes was speaking is that memories come up of past events, of past fears, of past traumas. I've actually spoken to a few people in the community who said, "Oh, I remember that I experienced, I was in a shooting a year ago or 2 years ago," but it may not even be as close an incident, but shocking incidents, fearful incidents, traumatic incidents. So people sometime later may be remembering something that they had completely forgotten about, or find themselves feeling depressed or not feeling quite right. And I could think an event like this would impact them like that psychologically.
Sure. So how do folks care for themselves? How do they work through something like this on a just on a regular daily basis type of thing?
Well, if people are feeling low levels of distress, they're hearing about this in the news, but they didn't know anyone there and they weren't directly exposed to any of the gunfire or the sounds that go along with that. I think it's mostly trying not to let this capture too much of their attention. It's not that they want to be unfeeling,
Sure.
but it's not something for them to amplify their involvement in. I don't see that that's particularly helpful to them. They can feel fortunate that they don't need to do that. If there are folks who are feeling a lot more than that, then they need to band together with those whom they trust and love. One of the things that happens when there's violence is that it violates a social contract, a sense that we're not going to hurt each other, we're going to play by the rules, we're going to obey the law. And so when something like this happens, it sends threat messages through our nervous systems. And so our brain reacts to it automatically and mobilizes us to be self-protective and protective of those we care most about. And so banding together with those people is a healthy response. And it's something that we do rather intensely. So you'll see the families and friends banding together immediately within minutes or hours of hearing of this. And it will last for quite some time. And gradually there'll be less and less of that as the threatening reaction in the nervous system begins to subside. But from time to time, if somebody is struggling with those kind of feelings again due to reminders, we sometimes call them triggers, then it's good for them to come together again with these people who not only do they know and love, but trust is key, because it's trust that was violated. Now, in the psychotherapeutic relationship, trust is also key. So we would be remiss if we didn't recommend that if this goes on for more than a month and you're really struggling with feelings, do consider visiting a professional, a mental health professional, a psychotherapist, whatever your leanings, but someone who isn't part of your family, who is going to have a confidentiality arrangement with you that we have in psychotherapy, so that you can really open up and they can use skills that they have developed over a long period of time to help when the hurting really needs that special care.